Hi guys, and welcome to another Feiyu-Tech product review on my channel. Been a while since I did the G4S from Feiyu-Tech, and I finally got my hands on their new product. As you can see, this is the Feiyu-Tech Summon, which is their 3-axis stabilised handheld camera. Now, note the word camera on that, because this is a big change for Feiyu-Tech in many respects. Just to go through a little history of Feiyu-Tech, basically they started doing camera gimbals when they were developing gimbals for things like the quadcopters. So the Phantom, they came out with a 2-axis gimbal that was designed for the GoPro Hero 3 at the time. They created that, and then all of a sudden they thought, well, you know what, people are enjoying these. I wonder whether they'd like a handle to hold it with, and some, you know, batteries that weren't LiPo batteries, and basically give people the option of using their GoPro on the ground with a bit of stabilised footage. So they came out with something called the G3 handheld, which was exactly just the same basically as their quadcopter gimbal, but with a handle on it and internal batteries, and they kept developing. Now, anyone who's subscribed to this channel will know that I'm pretty familiar with their products because I've owned pretty much all of them, I think. Certainly once they started doing their 3-axis gimbal range with the G3 Ultra, I had that. Here is the G3 Ultra handheld version, as you can see there, and then they moved on and they developed a slightly newer version, less wires, anything like that, which is the G4, and then most recently they then announced the G4S, which is the one that I reviewed last, so you can see that there. So I've had my hands on pretty much all of them. I've also done a lot of testing with their other with their flight cameras and flight gimbals as well, so you know, I'm quite familiar with the way that Feiyu-Tech actually, you know, operate and the way that they build products. So it was you know, quite important for me to get my hands on this, because I think a lot of people who subscribe to my channel will be interested in these kind of things. And I'm also doing a number of other projects involving non-Feiyu-Tech products soon as well. So you'll be able to see a comparison between this, hopefully some Zion products, and also a Lampart product as well, which is coming out or has been out for a while. But I've got my hands on one which should be being reviewed probably within the next 3 weeks as well. Anyway, onto this product in front of us. So basically, as I've just said, all of their products were designed around the GoPro. So we've got the G4S here. You can see it's designed so you can nice and easily take your expensive Hero 4 camera, slide it off, had a USB connector, you could slide it on there, it would charge it would do all of this, and all of these products have been based around having a GoPro camera. Now the problem is with that is that if GoPro decide that they no longer want to make the same form factor, or if they decide that they want to change their USB layout, or if they decide that they want to do anything really, companies like Feiyu-Tech are very much in jeopardy, because if everyone wants to buy the new camera and it doesn't fit any of their old products, then they find themselves in trouble. The idea behind this is to remove the need of GoPro. So with that said, let's just crack it open, and nothing surprising, you take open the box and you get another box. And again, anyone who's watched the G4S video will be very familiar with this particular case, because it is in fact identical. There's the one for the G4S in the way they do it, and they do this for all of their range at the moment. It seems they just change the inlay slightly, but that's good. This is, you know, a case that in my G4S review, I really like this case. I think it's got a nice sort of fake carbon fibre, it's got a handle to it, the quality feels good, it doesn't feel like it's going to fall to pieces. You know, it's exactly what you need on a product like this, and some of their older ones, it was always an issue because you had to find a way of transporting them around and you wanted them protected. So, you know, A+ for having this case and making it a good case that's going to go across a number in their range. So let's just take a look inside the box. Very simple layout, as you can see. Only 3 things actually in here. You've got the battery, you've got the main housing, and then you've got the handle itself, and then you've got a little zipper pocket as with the other models. And inside that zipper pocket, nothing particularly adventurous. USB, micro USB charge cable, and you've then got a warranty card, standard warranty card, and then you've got 2 instruction manuals. One of them is in English-ish, and the other one is completely in Chinese. So that's literally all you get in the case, but doesn't need anything complicated there. Now, just to go back to the G4S, what you've got in the case there, if I just open that up, there we go. So slightly different. You can see you had the housing for it, you've got the space for the bottom of the handle, but you also had a USB charger, and it came with 4 smaller batteries. So these are little tiny ones like that, or fairly small ones like that. So you'd have 2 sets, so 2 would run them and 2 would actually be spare. So you'd also have a charger that you could do. Now interestingly, as we can see in here, there's no charger, so it's all designed around basically charging your battery through the device, which we'll go into later on in this video as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, there's pros and cons to it. Battery has differed, and they've increased the size dramatically. So if I can get the thing to focus, there we go. It is a 22650 3000 milliamp 3.7 volt. So a single battery. You only get one battery, so there's no spare in here, which is a bit of a shame, definitely. But that's literally it. So you get the battery there, you then get the main housing, you then get the handle at the bottom. So slight change up for Feiyu-Tech here. This is now rubber, so it's not the knurled aluminium that you used to get. Let's make sure this camera will actually focus on it. There we go. But as always with Feiyu-Tech, very nice grade of aluminium, nice finish to it, nice milling, and inside there you can see there's an inner thread, and that is designed for the extension handle. So the carbon fibre extension handle that came out with the G3 Ultra, I think it was, that still fits. I have one and it definitely does still fit. And then on the inside here, that is a 1/4 inch tripod thread as well, so you can mount this on top of a tripod, which is good. So that's the base handle, nothing particularly entertaining about that. And all we do to get the thing put together, battery goes in there, then we haul out the main unit, and we do the 2 up. Job's a good one. 1 complete article, all good. So let's just take a quick look in this particular view, so we can just see what it's all like. So very nice, simple layout, as you can see, aluminium, all of this. We've got what looks like 3 buttons, but is actually 2. You've got a shutter button, which is the red button there. You've got a mode button, which is this one here. And then you've got what looks like a button, but is actually the joystick. And what's quite interesting about that is if we look at the side profile, it's very flat. So movement, it's more of a slider, I would say, than it is a joystick, which is a definite change up. If we just hop over to its Hero counterpart, you can see that this joystick here, if the camera will go, there we go, is actually quite a little stubby little thing. But it is a proper joystick, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not this this kind of slider actually is any good, if it makes it harder to use, easier to use, if it's more sensitive. The other thing that's really nice that I notice is an LED just there. So that is a status LED. It's going to tell you whether what mode you're in, but it's also going to tell you whether your battery's dying or anything like that, and that's something that was sorely missing on some of the older models, so it's good to see there. Swing it to the side, you've got a little USB port, so there's your charge port there, micro USB, and you won't lose that because it's actually fixed on, which is always nice to see. And then just behind there you've just got a rubberized part there, and what's nice also is this is another 1/4 inch jack point, so that is a tripod mount. So not only do you have one in the base, but you also have one here, so you can actually mount it sideways on, which is you know, useful if you're doing cycling and stuff like that. And again, I'll take a look at those kind of features later on in the video. Taking a look at the camera itself, brushed aluminium, a little bit smudged. You've got the lens cap, take the lens cap off, nice aluminium effect on the inside of the lens ring. Very simple, you know, face of it. We've got a little flash LED, so that's a fill flash type LED. Nothing particularly bright about that, I'm sure, but we'll see later on. On the top of it you've got a single button, and basically this button is a mode button, so that will switch you between photo and video mode, and again we'll look at that. Microphone on the side of it, and then on the side here we've got ports. So we've got micro SD, we've got USB, which is a micro USB, and we have also got the HDMI, so micro HDMI on the side of it. So very similar in every respect to something like a GoPro on the side ports. That case, or that side panel, does not have a little flappy do that will stay around, so that will almost certainly get lost. And then of course on the back of it, as you can see, a very, very glossy non-touchscreen screen. So we'll take a look at that later when we look at the menu system and everything on it. But interesting to see that they've gone for a very, very glossy effect on there. But yeah, it's not a touchscreen, so that's an interesting point there. But in general, you know, first impressions as you get it out of the box, very good quality as always with Feiyu-Tech. You know, the feel of these things really does, you know, give you confidence that there is some quality to it. It tends to be, you know, with Feiyu-Tech, unfortunately, that the software and the firmware and a few issues here and there tend to be the thing that let them down. So hopefully this will come out with glowing colours like the G4S did, because that was a marked improvement over a lot of the stuff that they've had before. So what we'll do now is I'll change view. We'll get down to a sort of view that you can see all the various modes. I'll show you the modes on the bench, so you can just see how it operates. We'll go through the menu and what's in the menu, and then after that we'll do some proper in the real world testing to see, you know, how good this camera is, because we're not just testing a you know, a stabilization platform now, we're testing a full camera. So this is probably going to be quite an involved video, as always with one of my videos, so expect it to be quite long, and hopefully you won't all get bored of watching it, but it should give you a good overview of what this is like. Okay, so let's just go through the basic modes for the gimbal, as per usual with these videos. We've got the two buttons here. We've got the shutter button, which is the red button, and we've got the on-off button and the mode button, which it also serves a purpose for. So all we do is we hold the mode button down, a couple of seconds, you can see a green light, and boom, gimbal kicks into life. You get a little word summon that comes on the front of it, screen kicks in, a bit glary as you can imagine indoors, but that's its default mode. So basically the modes that you've got, the default mode is panning mode. You've then also got panning and tilting mode, lock mode, and basically I'll show you how to get to those various modes and what they do. Nothing particularly rocket science or different in terms of what they're doing. Very similar to all of the other gimbals out there, and especially the Feiyu-Tech ones. So as I say, the panning mode is the standard mode. Now that means basically that if you twist your wrist, the camera will automatically follow the direction. However, the horizon will stay the same. So if we put the camera sideways on, you can see the horizon will stay the same. And if I rock or spin the handle, it will follow it along. Now the joystick does work. You can use it as much as you like in this mode, but the idea is that the horizon will always be locked in. So you can also see, worth noting, a single blue flashing light. So the next mode that you've got as an option in this mode is lock mode. Now what lock mode does, and lock mode works in basically any of the modes, lock will actually lock the camera into a specific position. So let's say, you know, we pointed the camera over here and we say, so about there, and I click one more time. You'll see if I now rotate the handle round, blue light's on, and obviously the camera is no longer following my movements. If I pan and tilt and everything like that, the camera is now in a fixed location. So the idea is that will be pointing at one fixed object, and no matter what you do, it will always be pointing at that object. So to come out of that mode, we simply just have to single click, and now we are back to the standard mode. So the other mode is basically panning and tilt. So what we do for that is we double tap, and what that now does, we've still got the panning, as you can tell, you know, left and right, that's all fine. But now if I were to say, you know, go over the edge of a bridge and I wanted to see what's underneath the bridge, if I lean down, you can see the camera will actually allow me to lean forwards. And just like before, if I single tap in this mode, so let's say I've got a fixed object at the bottom of that bridge down here, single tap there, you can see the blue light is gone solid again, and again, doesn't matter where I go, the camera is going to be looking straight down. And to get back out of that mode, we single tap, and then we're back to panning. Now interestingly, when you do that, it will continue to be pointing downwards. So of course, to get the horizon back, the easiest way to do it, just get your joystick, and you pull down with the joystick and it will go up. So you see, if we just look at the joystick in a bit more detail, a push right there, if I do a slow push, you get a slow movement. So it's very, very sensitive, quite tricky to get the hang of, and again I'm going to comment more on that later on in this video, but you can see that it slides like that, and if we want to get the horizon right, we push up and down. So up actually puts the camera down, and down puts the camera up, so it's kind of an inverted motion. And that is very much the basics of it. Now if we wanted to put it in standby mode, all we've got to do is hold the mode button for 1 second, I believe. And you can see now this is in standby mode, so the motors have stopped working. It's all flopped down, not doing anything. However, the camera is still on. So if you wanted to, you could take manual photos or anything like that if you wanted to do that. All we've got to do to get it back again, single tap, boom, motors will restabilize, everything kicks back in. And if we want to turn it fully off, all we got to do is hold the button down a little bit longer. You see the red light flashes, little symbol there, and that's it. So the camera is now completely dead. You can take it to pieces and do what you want with it. So those are basically the standard kind of operating modes. Now there's a couple of other things that's worth mentioning whilst I'm here. So let's just turn the camera on. I'm going to spin it round, and I'm going to put it in lock mode so you can see the handle. So I'm going to lock the camera so it's facing us, single tap, and now I can turn the handle round so you can actually see what I'm doing on the handle. So one more thing that's worth mentioning, obviously the shutter button. Now, you know, again, not rocket science. When you press that in video mode, that will turn the video on, so that'll start your recording and it will stop it again. In photo mode, then it will take a photograph, and likewise. But also if you double tap, you can see now that we've got what they call the fill flash, fairly weedy LED to be honest, but it's still an LED. So a double tap on that will actually operate it. Now that doesn't start anything or stop anything, the double tap only turns it on, and another double tap turns it back off again. So you do have the option of having a little bit of light if you were filming in the dark, and again we'll do some testing with that and see how that goes. So I'm going to now swing that back round again, and we can see that. And then the only other thing, what I'll do is I'll double tap there and just get this a little bit closer so you can see on the top of the camera we've got this switch here. So if you just look at this symbol, you've got the video symbol there, single tap on that, and that goes into photo mode. And there are different options within these two modes, so what I'll talk about now is the photo mode and what other little extras are involved in photo mode and video mode that are available to you. Okay, so now let's have a look at the menu system within the camera. So to access that, all we've got to do is triple tap, 1, 2, 3, and you can see that the menu pops up in front of you. Now this is not a touchscreen, as I mentioned before, so everything is done via the joystick. Very simple operation of the menu, up and down gets you up and down the menu, and then you use the right command to go into each option, and then if you want to back out of it further you can use the left command. So very straightforward, no major problems with that. So what I'll do is I'll just go down each one by one, go into them, have a quick chat about it. There's a few of these modes that need a little bit more description, and later on in the video I'll do a test of some of those features, which I'll mention as I go down one by one. So first option you've got is media playback. So if we use the right option, you can see it gives you then a sub option of do you want to watch your videos, do you want to watch your JPEGs. So if you then go right into that, then you've got the various movies that have already been taken, very boring ones for myself, so we'll come back out of that, but a nice way of previewing and watching the stuff that you've taken. Movie size, let's go into this. So it defaults to 1080, and it in fact defaults to 1080 at 60 frames a second, which is fairly standard these days for a lot of the action cameras. You can see below it you've got options of 30 frames a second, you can go to 120 frames a second at 720, 60 frames a second. You've also got a VGA mode at 240, very similar to the Hero camera in that respect. If we come down, we've also then got 4K at 25 frames a second, we've got 4K at 15 frames a second, 2K at 30 frames a second, and then there's the 1440 at 30 frames a second. So the highest 4K resolution you can get is 25 frames a second. So not particularly amazing, but very similar to the GoPro. The GoPro does 30 frames a second. And again, I'll do some testing of all of these in brief later on in this video so you can get a view for each of them. But for now, we'll keep it at 1080p at 60 frames a second. Field of view, if we go into that, as per the GoPro, very similar, wide, medium, narrow. Again, I'll do some testing, but I believe that will just basically crop the edges if you go into the narrow view. Distortion correct. Now that, according to the manual, is something that will take the fisheye element out, so it's automatically doing it. So whether that's some digital kind of adaptation whilst you're actually filming, it'll be interesting to do a test of that. So again, we'll do that. It's literally an on-off option, so not much point in talking about it much more than that until we test it. Likewise, slow motion, again, this is something that needs testing because slow motion is a simple on or off, so it's not using the frames per second, because anyone who hasn't done it before, if you wanted to do slow motion yourself, the way you would normally do it is you would change your filming mode into a high frame per second rate, and then you can then slow it down in post-production. So to have a slow motion mode on here means that it will probably do kind of some digitized slow motion effect. So we'll give it a test of that, see whether that's any good or whether it's just kind of chopping out frames, which it may well be doing. Moving further down, we've got white balance on auto as default, but you've also got a daylight setting, a cloudy, fluorescent, and a tungsten. So there's no spot meter or anything like that. It's just a simple case of a very simple auto or choice of various white balances. So again, we can do some testing of that. Time-lapse, this is a whole new feature that I think deserves its own section in this video. So again, later on there will be that. Even if it doesn't sort of cater for that in this video, I'll do a separate video on it. But one thing that's worth mentioning is with time-lapse on this camera, because it's a 3-axis gimbal, you can actually change, you can not just have it as a static camera, but you can make the panning motor very, very, very slowly rotate, so you can get a really nice dynamic time lapse. So anyone who's used like an egg timer and put a GoPro on top of it will know what I mean. You can get a nice kind of moving slowly left to right on it, but with this you can control both the level speed, which is the tilt motor, and the vertical speed, which is the pan motor, or vice versa, and you can basically say how slowly you want them to travel. So you can have a time duration. If we just go into it, you can say how many frames per second it takes, and then you can also say how long you want the time lapse to last, so 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 60. We can also have then level speed. So what that does is that says how quickly per minute the motor will go from left to right. So again, it deserves more detail because the instructions aren't particularly clear on that. So I'll do another section on the time lapse later on. So we'll skip past that for the moment. Invert mode, very simply, if you turn it on, screen will go upside down, so it means that when filming or when holding the gimbal upside down, you will then be able to use the menu. So we can come out of that and you'll see everything is all upside down. So I'll just go 1, 2, 3, back into the menu. We'll go up to invert mode and we'll turn that off. Boom, back to normal. Underneath that, date stamp, obviously very simple. We'll just put a time and date stamp on your video that you're taking. Date and time gives you various options. It means you can have it in UK date format as well, which is quite nice. Language, straightforward, English. I have a quick look at it. You can get quite a few different languages, I think. Yeah, there we go. There are the options for the languages. Obviously, I don't want to mess with that, so it mess up the system. System. You've got the factory reset option, which will just take it back to its factory default settings. System information, not particularly informative. It's got V1.00. Now, I updated the firmware to 1.350 yesterday. So when you update the firmware version, it doesn't change this on the menu, which is quite interesting. So whether this has any relevance to anything, I have no idea, but maybe it's a hardware version. And the only other thing in there, you can get some card information, so you do get an idea of how much you've got left on your card before you have to get all of your photos or your videos off. Under that, we've got a Wi-Fi password. Now, there is an Android app available for this. I haven't downloaded it yet myself, purely for the fact I don't yet have an Android device to test it with. I'm a bit of an Apple man myself. If I can, I will get hold of a device and give it a test, but I'll probably only do that if I really think this thing's worth doing. So we'll find that out later on in this video, of course. But there is the possibility to basically you synchronize this with the Android app, and then you can control various movements. You can use the shutter operation and stuff like that. Sadly, no sign of an Apple app, and I'd be very surprised if Feiyu-Tech went the route of getting one as well, because they're not particularly good with Apple. They've yet to do any firmware software or anything. Anyway, the final one under there is format, which obviously is the way to format your SD card. So those are your basic kind of menu operations. Again, there's some of them I need to test and try out later on in the video, but they are the basics that you get, so it will give you an idea of some of the number of functions and different settings that are available. Okay, so let's get on to the important part of actually reviewing some of the footage out of the Summon gimbal. And for this part, I'm going to be talking for quite a while over this. Hopefully I won't get all bored of it. I'm going to try and keep it as relevant as possible. But basically what I do is I get out there and I do my usual testing on my bike, walking. At the end of this section, there's also a bit where I look at the time-lapse settings. And I also do some filming in some slightly darker environments, indoors. And that's when I'm indoors is when I'm going to talk about the audio, because the audio is something that needs to be mentioned in this video. I won't talk about it right now. So for the moment, I'm riding on a bike. This is what I do as my standard test. So a fairly nice smooth road surface, suspension on my bike. You can kind of see what you can get when you've not got the bounce of an up and down walking. And that's something that, again, I will mention when we start to get to that section. But the key with this is that we're reviewing both camera and gimbal. So the stabilisation, how well it holds the horizon. So if you look at the line of the horizon, you want the left edge and the right edge to be as matched up in kind of in a vertical line as possible, and you want it so when you pan around, you don't want either dropping or raising, because that's basically showing you that the gimbal is not locking onto that horizon. And that horizon lock is the thing that makes you feel that this is really, really stable footage. That's the key to it all, really. And for the most part, as you can see, as I'm panning around, there's maybe a tiny little bit of drop, but nothing to write home about, I would say. I was reasonably impressed with the way that it handles the horizon, and that's likely because it's using similar kind of motor technology and stabilisation to the G4S. And the G4S, for the most part, is very, very reliable in the way that it actually kind of holds that horizon. Now you can see in this section of footage there's a bit of bounce up and down. Now mostly that's because the road surface got a little bit lumpy, and of course if I'm going over bumps you're still going to get some of that up and down movement translated. But I do notice, as I'll mention later on in some of the other footage, that there's maybe a slight knock kind of sensation. I guess that's the best way that I can describe it, where you're walking along and you can just sort of, you feel that the camera is shaking a little bit more than you'd like. Now while I'm talking about this, I need to mention that I am super critical of this. And most importantly, with this video review, you need to look at the footage and you need to say to yourself, you know, if I'm thinking of buying something like this, does this tick the boxes for what I would expect out of a gimbal? You know, is this stable enough? Is it too wobbly? Would I be better off buying a different camera? And I think that's the main reason why I've got so much footage on here that you can just kind of review, and why I talk so much about it, because ultimately what I expect out of a gimbal is probably very different to what you expect out of a gimbal. I'm kind of a perfectionist with it. I've used so many of these things in my time as well, so I know what a great one feels like. I know what a good one feels like. However, I'm also someone who's maybe too critical, because ultimately, these are not professional products. These are hobbyist home kind of products. They're not cheap, don't get me wrong. 280, 290 pounds is a lot of money, but you're never going to get the same quality as a full-blown 4K video camera with its own stabilizer or anything like that for this kind of money. You're going to get kind of, maybe if you're lucky, GoPro Hero-esque kind of footage, and you're going to get the stabilization of something like a G4S. Now with that in mind, as we just watch this piece of footage, this is me now walking in mode 1, so you can see the up and down bounce that you do get when you're walking. That's something that always happens when you're walking with a gimbal. You can't really easily counter that out unless you do it with your wrist, so don't expect this to counter out the up and down bounce of walking. But what I was trying to talk about there is the price point. 280 to I think it's 280 to 300 pounds for this. Now you've got to bear in mind that when the G4S came out, it was around 250 pounds on its own. Add on to the fact that you would then need a GoPro Hero 4 camera or equivalent, and you add on another £250 minimum if you go the GoPro route, or maybe £150 if you get one of the sort of the Chinese versions of those cameras. But again, with that, if you're not using a GoPro with those stabilizers, there are issues with balance, and it's they're designed around those cameras, so anything you use that aren't specifically weighted and balanced for those cameras tend to be a little bit iffy. But that's a £500 product. If you add a GoPro Hero 4 on top of a G4S, that's £500 of your money. This is £300 maximum of your money. So you've got to bear that in mind. So when you look at what you get in a complete package, you get your carry case, you get your battery, you get everything out of the box. You know, you've got to ask yourself, is this footage good enough for what I would expect to pay to buy a camera with all of these various features and a stabilising gimbal? So that's the most important thing. So now let's just take a look at some of this footage. For me, this is 1080 by 60 frames a second, and the entire video uses 1080 by 60 frames a second apart from the time-lapse stuff. It does have 4K, it does have 2K. I do have some videos of that, so if people would like to see some of that, I can post it. Obviously it needs to be a separate video because this video itself is formatted purely in 1080 by 60 frames a second. But I think, to be honest, that's the setting that most people are going to use, especially for the fact that the 4K is 25 frames a second. It's not 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, so that's going to be a more used format, is going to be the 1080p. Now what we can see in this video here, I'm trying to do a bit of dark to light whilst I'm walking along. This video we're now going to put it in lock mode, so what I've done is I've locked the camera onto this building, so as I'm walking forward it should stay relatively, you know, stable and focused on that building. And you can see what I mean about the bumpiness to it. There's just a shimmer here and there, and it may be the rough surface that I'm walking on. It's almost like a rattle. Now again, I think that's possibly something that you can counter out whilst walking. I have to admit, later on I did notice whilst I was walking on the beach, so you know, that was a fairly soft surface, so I'm not entirely sure whether it is something to do with that. And you can see here, that's actually my GoPro Hero Session, which I bolted onto the handle of this. What I was doing there was moving the gimbal around all of its constraints, so you could kind of see that even whilst I was walking and really wobbling my hand around, that it was giving a relatively stable bit of footage. So all in all, I was quite impressed with the lock mode. No real arguments there. Now what I'm doing here now is I'm literally just using the joystick, because one thing that I wanted to kind of find out is how sensitive the joystick is, how easy it is to move around, and you can see it's a little bit jerky in places. One thing that I did find a bit of a problem was with the joystick, finding a smooth roll was quite difficult because it's more of a slider rather than an actual joystick itself. Zion, for example, and their Z1 Evolution, it's a proper joystick, and indeed on the G4S from Feiyu-Tech, it's a proper joystick. It sticks out. It gives you the ability to kind of place your thumb on it and you can just use very smooth motions. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of do a slow moving pan up, but you can see it's not perfect, and I have to admit that was probably the 5th or 6th attempt at trying to do a slow down to up motion. So the slider, it takes some getting used to. I wouldn't say it's something that you need to worry too much about, and for most people it's absolutely fine, but if you're wanting to try and do some very steady motion, the slider really does get a bit of getting used to. So you can see here now what I've got is this is actually slung downwards, so this is in its inverted mode. So I wanted to just sort of demonstrate with my hairy legs, just the sort of shots that you could get if you hold it upside down. Now I actually had to rotate this footage, so that's something to bear in mind. If you buy a GoPro camera, there's an auto rotation mode. So the Hero 4, not the Hero 3, but the Hero 4 has an auto rotation mode whereby it will recognize when you're holding the camera upside down, and it will actually flip the image for you, so you don't have to do it in post. With this camera you can put it in inverted mode, but the problem is you've got to go through the menu system to do that. That then turns it upside down, and you still then have to kind of film it upside down and then convert it. It was a bit clunky in that respect, but again, you know, if you've got a half decent editing suite, converting it to 180 degrees, flipped around, is not very difficult. But you can see some nice, footage there. Now, what we're looking at here, this is with the camera in distortion mode on. So that's anti-distortion. So as I pan around this is with the mode switched on. Now the idea is that this is taking the fisheye effect out. So now I flip on and you can see, just look at the straight edges of the roof. You can see that it's got that curved effect, and that's kind of the anti-distortion mode that with it turned off. So you do get that fisheye effect with it off. So actually it's a digital processing to have it on, but it does work pretty well. And in this I put them side by side, so you can see on the left it's on and on the right it's off, and you kind of hard to tell in a side by side, but basically if you look at the straight edge of the roof, it's straighter on the left hand image than it is on the right hand image. So now we flip back to inverted mode whilst riding the bike. Again, so you can see a bit of the road surface. You can see I'm holding it underneath my body, just gliding along on this fairly rocky bit of path. But just to see, the effects that you get, how smooth it is when you're actually bouncing around, and also the lighting. I think it's worth mentioning that the contrast, the light to dark contrast on this camera is better than many. Some of the Chinese cheaper cameras, they really don't cope well with going from light to dark. You get a very kind of a juddery effect as you go from black to light again. So as we go there, it picks up the fact that we've gone behind that, and then it pops the sun back out there, and you can notice that the colours are represented quite well. The greens are coming out nicely. I would say it's a softer image than I would maybe like, but all in all, pretty reasonable, perfectly reasonable for the money that you're paying, I would say. And I would also say that it copes with that transition from light to dark a lot better than many of the other Chinese cameras on the market. Okay, so now we're going to move indoors. Now this is where I'm going to flip from my voice here to let you listen to the audio on this.
What are you up to then, Charlie? Ah. Here's my camera. They'll have anything, these will. They'll have Charlie's face. Are you my camera? Oh, maybe so don't get stuck. What you thinking now? There you go. Charlie, my camera? Now flat, yeah? Flat? That's it. Excellent. Charlie, to me. Yeah. They're very keen, aren't they? Hold it out, or he'll rip it off. Are you fed him yet, Jess? Charlie, here you go. Oh, you're going to get eaten there.
So as you can hear, not good. Unfortunately, you can hear a lot of this shh sort of noise. That's the motors, as far as I can tell. It's the operation of the actual stabilising motors coming through the microphone. Very tinny. There's no bass to it whatsoever, and the direction of the microphone seems to be backwards. So it picks up the person who's using the camera, but it doesn't pick up people in front of it very well. And even if it does pick them up, unfortunately, it's completely drowned out by the noise of the motors. So reference only is all I can say to that. Useful if you want to match it up to a secondary audio device, but if you really wanted to use this for anything more than just a bit of fun and giggles with your friends, unfortunately for audio it really isn't very good at all, and it is very disappointing to me, because I think for the money this wasn't a bad device had it not been for that part. Anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit later on when I just draw some conclusions on it, but that's at least an example so you can hear it. What's interesting to see about this footage as well is that we're in a low light environment. I'm not actually using the fill flash, but again it's a slightly soft image, I would say. The graininess of it isn't too bad. Again it's not GoPro, unfortunately. It's not quite up at that standard, but it's not terrible. I feel the colours are a little bit off when you're in a lower light environment. So the colour of the hay on this horse, for example, is not particularly as realistic as it would be in real life, but all in all it's usable. It's not the end of the world, definitely, when filming in moderately low light settings, I would say. So audio, a little bit annoying unfortunately, but again, I'm back out on the beach now. I'm using this in bright sunshine. Notice the colours, notice the reflection, the colour of the sand. Again, a softer image than maybe I'd like, but it represents the colours reasonably well, and I think, for the money, it's really not a bad image, and I think the stabilisation is quite good. The horizon on this particular shot interests me because it's slightly up on the right. Unfortunately, when I move to the left, and again this is maybe me being a bit critical, as I sweep round in a moment to the left hand side, you can see the horizon moves a little bit but stays fairly flat here. But note, when I spin back round to the right, relatively quickly it should be said, notice there the horizon's still a little bit higher, and again it may be me just overplaying it a little bit, but it's just something I noticed. It may be because I've been transporting the thing in a bag and it was crashing around that I needed to do a reinitialization, but it was just something that I noted there that happened that one time. But all in all, for the bright sun, I think a good image. Now, what I'm going to talk about now, whilst we look at a couple of photos, so this is a narrow, a medium and a wide shot, followed by 3 photos just taken to see the photograph mode. What I'm going to talk about is time-lapse, because that's a nice little feature on this, and in a moment I'm going to show you 4 time-lapses twice over, so you can kind of digest them. But what's great about the time-lapse feature on this gimbal is that you can basically say, I would like the camera to spin in its yaw axis over a certain amount of time whilst taking a time lapse. So with the GoPro, you would say, I just want it to film at 3 frames a second for as long as you like. With this, you get to say that, but you also get to say, I would like over that period of time the camera to move from left to right over a certain distance over a certain period of time. So what we'll see in a moment is the first time lapse I took, which was over 10 minutes, very, very quick, cat running around the garden, nothing particularly interesting about it, but that's 10 minutes to do a full rotation basically. This one I said I want it to be half an hour to do a 180-degree rotation. And that's basically how you set it up. You say how far you'd like the camera to move, and then you'd say how long you'd like it to take. So when I was doing some sunset pictures, unfortunately on a slightly wonky tripod, it should be mentioned, that was, I think it was an hour I set that up for. So that was taking a full time lapse over an hour, and then likewise over the next hour, I did a nice one there. So again, I'm going to replay these in a moment so you can see them going again in the same order. But I think the key is that this is a really nice feature. It's something that I need practice with. You need to kind of get used to how fast it goes. But I think a really nice slow time lapse across a duration over over a period of time on a tripod is something that's a really, really nice little feature of this gimbal, and it's something that I think people will get a lot of fun and use out of. Certainly something that I would consider keeping this for just for this reason, to be honest, because it's something that is very difficult to do without going the egg timer route with the GoPro. But this is an all-in-one kind of device that can do that. So a real plus point, I think, regardless of the audio problems, I think the time-lapse feature is a really nice little plus feature for the Summon gimbal. So with a few photos running in the background, let's just draw some conclusions on the Feiyu-Tech Summon. All in all, I wouldn't say it was an amazing product, but I would say it's pretty reasonable. The camera was much better than I thought it would be. While a little bit soft, maybe, I think the colours are very good. I like the way that it copes with light and dark better than I would expect it to. Not great in low light settings, but then again, neither's a GoPro in that respect. But all in all, as a camera in itself, I think it takes reasonable photos, and I think you wouldn't be too disappointed with the footage that you get from it, especially in 1080 at 60 frames a second. The high resolution settings, they're not particularly usable in my opinion. I think the 4K doesn't cope very well with the tracking shots. When you're panning, it gets very blurry, and unfortunately that's something that I can't show in this video because it will need a separate 4K only video, so I will do that for people who are interested. The negatives, obviously the audio. The audio is a major failing in my opinion on this gimbal, and it's going to put a few people off, definitely. If you wanted to buy something like this and you just wanted to have it as kind of like a makeshift camcorder that you could just pull out of your bag at a party or a wedding or something like that and get some nice stabilised footage, unfortunately you're going to need an external source if you want to pick up anything that anyone's saying that's more than about 3 or 4 feet away from you. And again, I think unfortunately Feiyu-Tech are going to lose a lot of sales because of this. With that said, if you bought a GoPro and you stuck it on a G4S, you're not going to get great audio out of that, but in an enclosed environment it's not going to pick up anything like the amount of noise from the motors as this does, and I do think it's going to be certainly usable for for the hobbyist rather than anything beyond that. No one who's professional is going to be using something like this, but that said, if you wanted to get some some nice smooth footage, some tracking shots, anything like that, some cutaway shots from another camcorder, something like that, I think this is perfectly reasonable for the money. And likewise, I think with the time-lapse mode that's very good. I think you can get a lot of variety from this product, and you can just keep it in the carry case and you can kind of put it out of the way. I'm not a big fan of the slider rather than the joystick itself. I'd much prefer a proper joystick like the G4S had. The slider, you can get used to it, and over a bit of time I did find that I was improving the way that I was using it, but all in all I would still prefer to have that sticky outy joystick that gives you a little bit more of a range of movement. The buttons are a little bit noisy on the footage, but again that's based on the audio that you're picking up, so I don't think that's anything to get too concerned about. The battery life, pretty reasonable, 2 to 3 hours I would say, which given that you're powering a gimbal and a camera with a screen always on is actually pretty decent. And you've also got the option via the micro USB that you can plug in a power pack to it, so if you were doing a long time lapse or a long video, you could put in an extra external output input, and you'd be able to actually charge it or power it whilst you're actually on the go. So that's quite a nice little feature there, and it does give it some longevity. Charge time was a bit long. It took about 4 hours to charge it from 0 to full, which for a single battery is a bit much, but you can go on Amazon for about 15 quid and buy a spare battery and a charger, so again, nothing to be too fussed about. So all in all, there's kind of, there are pros and cons from it. Ultimately, I think it's going to come down to whether you like the footage, whether you, you look at my footage, whether you look at other people's footage from their review videos, and you feel that it justifies not having the audio for it. But I think for the money, compared to the G4S and the GoPro, I think you're getting a decent value for money. And if you shop around, if you go, certainly buy it from abroad, you can probably get it for a lot less than £280. But all in all, I would say, as a first attempt for a camera and stabiliser put together, this really isn't a bad effort from Feiyu-Tech, and hopefully over a bit of time there may be some improvements, and even a firmware update may sort that audio problem out in the future. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful. There will be some follow-up videos coming. I'll do some comparison of a G4S with a GoPro mounted to it versus the Summon side by side, so you can kind of see the clarity and the differences between the two cameras. I'll also be showing the 4K footage, the 2K footage in separate videos as well. There's not a lot, but they're just still separate videos. And also I'll do a bit more work on the time-lapse if people would like me to. So if you would like to see more about the time-lapse settings and how that all kind of works, then please get in touch with me, leave a comment after this video, and I'll do some separate videos in that respect as well. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.